Qualified in counselling and emotional literacy, an author, an experienced speaker when it comes to students' well-being and mental health. She is also a mother of four now grown-up children, so she knows only too well how turbulent, probably is the right word, how turbulent family life can be when it comes to tweens and teenage years. Janey Downshire, welcome to Thriving in Our Forties.
Well,
It is
thank you for having me, Rachel.
Well, it's really lovely to have you here. And I mentioned that you are an author, and this is the book that you have co-written, and it's called Teenagers Translated. And it goes on to say a parent's survival guide. I think that's exactly what it is. It's to help us to navigate through those teenage years, touching on topics such as anxiety, food issues, gaming, drugs, alcohol, you name it, you've covered it. But for the purpose of our conversation today, Janey, we're going to be focusing on puberty and porn, and how we can have these conversations with our children without the awkwardness that comes with these topics. And my children are not yet teenagers, but we're on the cusp of talking about these topics or starting to talk about them. And I think because they're such hard conversations to have, I speak on behalf of many people listening and many parents out there. We want to have the confidence to bring up puberty and porn, but without either party feeling embarrassed. And I think particularly when it comes to porn, feeling that we're empowered. So when the time comes, we have the tools and resources to talk to and to educate our children without the fear of it being a taboo subject, which I think is across the board what everyone probably feels. And so we're going to jump in straight with the questions and get your feedback and your advice and your wisdom. And I think what I want to start with, Janey, is asking about the challenges that we face as parents. So what are the biggest concerns parents have when it comes to children and adolescents today?
I mean, I think without doubt, it's their online world. It is the social media, it is gaming, it's how much time should my child spend online? When does the damage happen? Is an hour too long? How do I set the boundaries and limits around that? So that's probably the main problem that parents come up with. But then what leads on with that is, how do I set boundaries? How do I stop? How do I actually sort of police their whole phone use? And at the same time, maintain my relationship with my child and keep those lines of communication open, because it is a time when children do naturally, and it's normal, that they want to sort of separate and start to cut the ties from their parents and start to branch out into the wider world, find their tribe, make other social connections, and eventually move to have their own intimate relationship with someone. So it is a sort of a natural sort of uncoupling, as it were, time. But yet it's, for parents, it's a time, particularly with the challenges that we'll be talking about, that you need to keep the connection. How do you maintain the relationship? How do you keep having the conversations and yet at the same time let them go?
Absolutely. So let's start talking about porn. How early are boys and girls being exposed to online porn?
Well, depending on what their access is, what access they have at home to what devices, how strict your parental controls are, and what sort of tech issues you've got in place at home. It's very easy for a child to stumble on something that is pornographic. So it might be by accident. And certainly as young as 8, they could stumble on something. But I wouldn't say an 8-year-old is seeking out anything sort of pornographic. I think some of the games that some of the boys are playing have sort of some quite pornographic, as it were, sort of content in them, particularly if they are playing games suitable for an 18-year-old. So I think 8 to 9 wouldn't be abnormal, but I think what is more normal is probably 11 to 12, and by 13, I think Most children know it's out there. They've probably been shown something. Um, but I would say, there's only probably 10 or 20% of children are actually seeking it out, but they are then showing it to their friends.
This is the thing, and just on that note you just said about they're not actively seeking it out, some of these children. I was listening to one of the many resources that you sent me over the past few weeks, and I will share everything in the show notes. But I was listening to a podcast about TikTok in particular and the content that is being uploaded. And a staggering fact is that in a single day, 13 years of content is
Yes.
uploaded onto TikTok. And I had
Yeah.
to listen to that, Janey, 3 times to make sure that I was understanding that. And so when you say they stumble across it, they genuinely do, because they go into a rabbit hole. We all go into rabbit holes, don't we? We start scrolling, and before we know, we're looking or reading about something we didn't set out to do. So it's that fear of the innocence of what they're doing being completely manipulated into content that they didn't set out to view.
Sure.
So if they come across this content, obviously, whether they're seeking it or whether they stumble across it, Janey, staying with boys, what is the impact of the porn on their minds when it comes to their thoughts around relationships, sexual intimacy, sexual consent? What impact will that have on them?
Mm. Well, a teenager or a preteen, they're going to start to become curious and interested as part of the natural process of puberty. So, with the change of hormones, that just means you are curious. And so, the curiosity is going to be likely to sort of lead you to sort of have a look and to see what's going on online. I think the difference of the sort of pornographic content or what's available on TikTok or Instagram, you don't have to go onto Pornhub to see porn.
Mm.
This pornographic content is being fed across the social media platforms. Is that what parents today are battling with is way more sophisticated algorithms and AI, which is generating this content. And the more that's seen, the more it's fed. And what it's impacting is their beliefs about what sex is. This is sex. It's like their sex education. This is like a manual for a young brain who has no idea about sex at all. And then they're looking. So it's starting to mold this sexual behavior template that's coming online in their brain in terms of, what's normal, what's acceptable, what women, from a boy's perspective, what women like. Now, so much of it is violent, and it's effectively in the real world non-consensual. And the confusing thing for boys is that they're seeing women enjoying something that is, that there is now a new institute for strangulation. Whoever would have thought that strangulation, that you'd have to set up an institute against that, because so much of the content involves that sort of misogynistic, violent, aggressive behavior during sex. So what is it doing? Well, it's shaping an ideology in a young boy's brain. And it's presenting something. It's a norm. This is the norm. This is what sex is. And that's confusing because it's so far removed from, what the real world should be, what real life relationships and sex might involve.
And also, I think we touched on one of the conversations we've had prior to recording, is that it's instantaneous, isn't it? The porn that they're seeing online, it's not like the real world where you have to build a relationship before you get to that stage, normally anyway. So it's literally turning on the device and seeing the images straight in front of you, or seeing the content straight in front of you. And it's that instant hit.
And that is
What
intoxicating. It's intoxicating, and it is highly addictive because it is triggering the mind body to release this surge of dopamine as a result of seeing something that
Mm.
you shouldn't be seeing. It's like that feeling we all had when we were teenagers, when we were doing something, we thought, oh, I hope I don't get caught now. It's that sort of adrenaline excitement of not wanting to be caught. But you're seeing something that's incredibly sort of powerful and arresting.
Before we get on to what we can do as parents, I want to switch it over and talk about girls. So, what impact is online porn having on girls, Janey?
Well, girls are much more programmed they're much more wanting to have connection and a relationship. Um, they are obviously being influenced by what the boys want. So if boys are sharing stuff and there's an expectation, and then girls are being sort of castigated for, oh, she's a prude, she won't do this or that. So it is, of course, influencing the expectations on them. But I think in terms of seeking out pornography, I think less girls are looking at it. They're more disgusted by it in a way, but of course they are also curious about sex, and they're also wanting to try to understand, well, what should I be doing, what is normal. But I think it's triggering a lot of anxiety, and I think it's triggering a lot of anxiety around their own body image, around their own developing sexuality, and perhaps it's fueling them to want to avoid having those connections with boys because it is so scary.
That's interesting. Almost have the opposite effect because they don't want what they're seeing to be happening to them. It's all quite terrifying, if I'm honest, Janey.
Yeah,
Particularly the more you read about it, the more you hear about it. But I want to change that narrative as much as we can because
sure.
we can't avoid it. So can we
No.
reframe that? And could we now go on to discuss what we as parents can do to support, help our children in as much way as in as big as way as possible? So, what are those steps that we can take when we have those conversations? What tone should we be taking? Because it should be an open dialogue. It definitely shouldn't be one-sided or where parents feel that they need to lecture their young in order to get their point across.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. In the old days, one just sort of left these conversations to chance, and an adult might have said to you, you sort of understand, and you go, yes, 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 no, I completely understand. And that's where the big change has got to happen now, because I think parents have got to make sure that they give their children enough information, real information about real bodies and what real life sex is all about, to satisfy their natural curiosity and interest. So they don't need to look online in order to be able to work out kind of this, or to Google words or anything. I think the first thing to say to one's children is, don't Google anything. Don't search for anything related to sex, because the algorithms then are going to start to push content at you that you wish that you had never seen. I think start as young as possible to have age appropriate books around sex, about where babies come from, penises, willies, vaginas, all that sort of language has to be much more kind of normalized.
Mm.
I think we as Brits, we're quite stiff upper lip. I think we've got to become much more sort of Swedish and open about these conversations, and just normalize, start to have body parts that we talk about in kind of in real terms. And yes, so open up that sort of dialogue, so it just becomes a sort of gradual thing. And I think the important thing right from the start is to separate out sex is when two people, a young person, and at an age appropriate time, you are actually having sex yourself. And pornography is voyeurism. So that is you watching other people having sex. And I think that is something that I think perhaps people don't necessarily sort of separate those two things out, from the start.
I agree, because they're very, very different topics completely. I'm just thinking though, if we haven't started to talk to our children at a young age about sex and body parts, what can we do if they're slightly older? Because I think the inclination is for children to feel embarrassed and to shut down and to become monosyllabic. Parents kind of fumble their way through the conversation and think, right, I brought it up, draw a line under it. But I think also going back to your point of telling them not to Google something, is that almost red rag to a bull in terms of, will they then go and actually do it because they don't want to talk to their parents about it?
Sure,
They
sure.
might not then want to talk to their peers about it. So actually the safe place to go and look or learn about it is online. So how can we talk to that slightly older child in that respect?
We had the conversation with our son, and this was a long time ago. And this was pre sort of algorithms and then way more complicated landscape that you're dealing with now. Um, and he probably was about 15 or 16, so it was a bit later. But then he wasn't able to access much
Yeah.
kind of before that. So the first thing we said to him is, we need to have this conversation with you because we care very, very much that we want you to have a very healthy sex life when the time is right. And we want you to have lovely, intimate, caring relationships. Looking at pornography is not going to set you up for that. And we gave him sort of lots of reasons for that. The other thing that we did is that we looked quite hard at books and resources, and there's various things that I've shared with you. But I think that for parents, start to get more informed, way, way more informed
Mm.
about the damage of pornography. Educate yourself. When you read things, put them to one side. Keep an eye on radio programs or documentaries or anything you have. Share them with your child and just say, I'd like you to listen to this.
Mm.
I was actually quite shocked by this. I'd love to chat to you about it. Never ask your child, so what have you seen? It's never a Spanish Inquisition. It's never trying to check out, what have you seen? What haven't you seen? You always do it in the third person. So what are your friends all saying?
Okay.
What do you feel's going on amongst it? Would you say that I read this statistic the other day that this number of boys have got these sorts of problems? Would you say that's about right? Is that stat about right amongst your friendship group? What's the general chat amongst your group about boys, your boys, about watching porn? Do most people think it's really cool and they like it? Do some people not like it and won't look at it at all? Kind of what's going on? And if they talk in the third person,
Mm.
they like it. They also like the fact that you're asking their view and opinion, because that's part of growing up. You
Mm.
want to start to have these more balanced philosophical discussions where the parent doesn't impose their edicts, but they're asking, so you're finding and collaborating a sort of a way forward.
Although it's an incredibly personal subject, Janie, you're taking out that personal element, like you said,
Of
by
course,
making
of
it third
course.
person.
But you're
Um,
getting your child's view and opinion by doing
exactly,
that. And they don't
exactly.
realize that that's how because your child might say, yeah, no, I mean, people think porn is really cool. And then you think, oh, okay, right, I've got a lot of work to do. Or your child says, I think most people are just, they just don't like the look of it. And then you think, phew. So you sort of know where you are based on what they're saying about others.
Absolutely. Before we started recording, Janie, you brought up erectile dysfunction as one of the biggest problems of online porn. Could you give us a little bit of information about that and why, as parents, we should be learning more about this issue, but also talking to our children about it as well?
Sure, sure. So, I mentioned earlier about this sort of sexual behavior template that comes online in the brain. The brain is undergoing this massive, massive change and overhaul, and it is remolding itself, and it molds itself based on what it is experiencing. And the brain experiences things through the neurotransmitters, through the biochemicals that go up into the brain. So, I mentioned dopamine as well. Now, the more dopamine giving experiences that that a child has,
Right.
gaming, watching porn or whatever, that gives an unnatural amount of dopamine up into the
Mm,
brain. And that goes into the brain's reward and pleasure center. So the more dopamine, think of it a bit like a sugar high, the more dopamine that goes into the system, because the brain is remolding itself, it has to create the receptors to receive the dopamine molecules. This is a really simplistic view of it, of addiction, by the way, and so it's recreating itself. So when that dopamine drops away, then the brain kind of is asking for more of that dopamine. So when a boy watches pornography, he is starting to mold his brain to be, because the mind and the body are connected to each other, and this idea of arousal and libido, you're watching something and you're feeling aroused by it, but because you're watching it, your body and your brain are starting to train themselves to be switched on, turned on
mm,
by watching other people
mm,
having sex, not through the normal avenues of slow build of a relationship yourself, through the senses, through touch, through smell, through being with someone who feeling, excited by that person. You're not building it in the real world, you're building it. So that gradually your body becomes turned on through that. So boys will get erections when they're watching pornography. When I teach young boys, I will say to them, the worst thing you could do is masturbate to watching pornography, because that's really cementing that system to really work in that way. So if a boy is watching it, um, from the age of, let's say, 13, 14, 15, 16. That's quite a lot of years for that libido system to get itself
mm,
established. So when they come to having a moment with with somebody that might be age 17 or 18 or 19, the arousal system isn't working because it's trained to be aroused by something else. So you then have a generation of, I mean, not all young people, of course, but you have you run the risk that you can only have real sex if you've got porn
mm,
sex in the
mm,
background to help to arouse you. And then, the use of Viagra is quite widespread amongst young people now. And you have to, as a recreational drug, and you have to ask yourself why. Why
mm,
would young people be using that? And that, for me, I think it's the most. I think that older people don't understand that watching porn makes makes for this dysfunction, but it's the age at which you're asking. It's not saying to people over the age of 25, you'll get erectile dysfunction if you're watching pornography, because the system has got itself set in place.
mm.
But it's introducing that before the sexual template is it's at a very, very vulnerable age and stage, not just from the ideology that we've talked about, but the physicality as well.
Absolutely. I think that brings us on nice to talk about puberty as a whole, I think, Janey, because it is a time of heightened emotion. Boys and girls are feeling incredibly vulnerable. They're also very impressionable. So when it comes to emotive topics such as appearance, weight, fitting in. How do we have those conversations with our children? Because as we've discussed, the online world is wholly unrealistic. So how can we talk to them about making them feel more at ease with themselves as a person, not with what they're seeing on screen?
Sure. I think as parents today, you have to work a lot harder to sort of validate your child, to make sure that you are giving them honest feedback, particularly around their appearance. You're needing to be available to them to help them, particularly with a daughter who is much more, well, I say much more appearance based. I think boys, are very much worrying, are they ripped? Have they got a good body as well? It's helping to validate them, to give them feedback, to help them to develop this image and identity, because that's the main thing that they are developing at the time. It's also having a very good social life at home, so they get access to lots of other people and lots of people of different ages, their own ages, a good social life where you can then talk about, you can talk about other people and their likability, and you can have conversations sort of that way, but also give them realistic feedback about themselves. A father figure with a
Mhm.
daughter is very important, that you're not just focusing on their beauty, looks, figure, weight, that there's less of a comment on that, and there's much more feedback on the values, their sort of core characteristics, the effort that they put in, their kindness that they've seen, their humor, their likability. Those sorts of things are helping them to form their identity and their image, as opposed to leaving it to them to seek that online.
I think you're absolutely right. And I was going to pick up about it's not the physicality that we should be commenting on, because yes, there are times when you want to turn to your children and say, God, you look handsome or you look beautiful. But we have to take them away from that image assessed world, don't we? And
Yeah,
make it, like you say, about their achievements, their personality, what they're doing, their empathy, their sensitivity, and make it a much more rounded conversation opposed to what they're seeing and what they're trying to maybe recreate, whether that's through clothes, whether that's through makeup, whether that's through body image.
yeah.
um
I think that's interesting. I mean, just picking up on this sort of clothes and image and makeup, but also for boys about protein shakes and weights and all the rest of it. I think you will start to see their influences online, because they start to come to you to say, I really want some makeup, or what about fillers? I mean, you have young girls now who
Mm.
are having things like fillers and Botox. I mean, parents, it's important we don't play along with the online influences, that we try as much as possible to say, uh, I appreciate you want to get some makeup, or you want to sort of look good, but you look fabulous as you are. Let's get you a bit of something, for when you go out, but please don't feel that you need to do those things. Just try and push those influences away, and just let's get out and have some fun.
I think that is it. It's taking away the online world, giving them the physical world. And when then I was talking about it with a previous guest about the impact of devices in young people's life in general, and how important it is that when you put that phone or that device down, you do then have to fill it with other activities, whether that is doing sport or whether that is socialized or whether that's learning something new. But it's feeling valued when you're not on that screen. So when they're not looking and they're not scrolling, they're actually gaining something,
Yeah,
whether that is a better friendship or whether they're baking a cake or whether they're getting outside. And actually, my son said to me this morning, he walked outside, he said, Mummy, the sun is shining. It makes me feel really good. And he's 10.
yeah,
And I wanted to then launch into a whole kind of charade about, yes, this is why you shouldn't be online and this is why it's so important to get out. But I just said, well, isn't that brilliant? And, you know, when you're not gaming, think how good you can feel when you're outside cooking a football. And I suppose it's just drip feeding it to
Yeah,
them over the months and years. And those conversations are just going to be continuous.
yeah, yeah. And I think for parents, don't be frightened to put
Yes.
down some pretty strict rules at home around their online. I mean, I remember years ago having a discussion with my son about in those days it was the Xbox, and he said, everybody has an Xbox. I'm the only person that doesn't have one. And I said, well, I'm afraid that's just how we do it here. And he would say, yes, but when I go to X's house, I can play all day. And I said, great, you play there all day. But when you come back here, that's what we do. So I think it's for parents, it's putting your picket fence around your family based on what you believe to be right for you. And you might have to have some backup or some evidence for that. But you just say, this is how we do it in our house. When you are old enough to fund your lifestyle that you can sit for 12 hours gaming and you've got enough money to get by and everything, great. That's going to be your choice. But while it's my responsibility for your well-being and how you grow up, this is how we do things in our house. And accept there's going to be arguments and let those arguments happen. Don't be beaten down by them. But it's always coming from a place of love, and it's my duty. I think a duty of care is quite a good expression to have, particularly with this online real toxicity, which is resulting in mental health, serious mental health issues that show their signs by the age of 14. And 1 in 4 children are going to have some form of issue at some stage. Now, it's a moving landscape, mental health. But while we parents know that there are dangers there and educate ourselves, then we put our fence round and say, no, you're 13. This is what happens when you're 17 or so. Then we move that fence. Of course we do.
I think that is completely right. The older that I get, Janie, the more stronger I get in my opinions, actually, because when my children were younger, I didn't want to be the cool mum, but I wanted to be the relaxed mum. And yeah, it's fine, you know, bring the sweets in or, you know, do this, do that. And the more that I'm learning, the more that I'm talking to people and the more confident that I'm getting in myself about my own parenting skills, I am now turning around to my children and saying, if someone comes over, they leave their phone on the kitchen table. You definitely don't have phones upstairs. If they want to play a game together, I'm said, right, you can play a game for half an hour and then you're outside. Whatever it is, you know, I'm setting my boundaries, and whether children kick back, it almost slightly empowers me because I'm a bit like, I'm the adult. I'm doing this because it's my rules, my house. And if you don't believe in that, then, you know, that's a conversation we'll have. But this is where I stand. And then going on to resources as well, we have got so much that we can share with our listeners, can't we? And we could sit here talking for days. So what I do want to do now is just wrap it up and say thank you so much for your time today and everything that you shared with me over the last few weeks. You've been drip feeding me videos and books to read and podcasts to listen to. I will put those all in the show notes. And like you just alluded to, the more that we as parents know and understand, the more confident and empowered we can be going forward.
Yeah. And just one thing to add, parent power. Get together with other parents and share resources amongst yourselves so that your community of parents are all starting to sing off the same hymn sheet. So rather than, oh, well, when we go to to Rachel's house, she's really mean, but we can go somewhere else. Start to be more united as a community.
That's a brilliant idea. I will gather the mothers and the fathers together.
Yeah, good idea.
Uh, thank you, Janey, so much. I've really appreciated your time today.
Pleasure. Lovely to talk to you.